Boarding. Well, welcome everybody. For those that I don't know, Eric Hortness with the Greater Madison Area Chamber of Commerce. I attended my first year of IOM down in Tucson this past January, and William was one of the faculty members. And when our newly formed state group was talking about webinars, and we put out the survey, this was one topic that came back as wanting from the group. And so I reached out to William, and he was gracious enough to agree to jump on here. I have a little bio that I'll go ahead and read, and then I'll turn it over to William.
Terrific.
William Pawlucy, CAE, MPA, IOM, fell into this wonderful world of nonprofits like most of us probably have. He fell into it and never left, with 3 decades of work across continents, including the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and Asia. He has had some really interesting, unique opportunities, such as the development of a post-conflict plan for Syria and setting accreditation standards in Georgia. He has collaborated with nonprofit organizations like the American Dental Association Foundation, National Association of Realtors, and many state and local state associations and chambers of commerce. His book, The Essential Handbook for Nonprofit Leadership, or The Handbook, is a best-selling book and recently designated the core text for the University of Louisville's Masters in Social Work program. Offers invaluable practical solutions and tips. Through his newly launched YouTube channel, The Nonprofit Life, he extends his commitment to knowledge sharing, providing accessible guidance to a wide audience. Before he fell into the world of nonprofits and association options, his career traversed various leadership roles in multiple industries globally, including serving as a national examiner for Malcolm Baldrige Performance Excellence Award. Residing in the charming city of Charleston, South Carolina, William balances his professional life with a warm and bustling family life, sharing his home with his wife, 4 children, 3 cats named Lulu, Salsa, and Smudge, and a dog named Rocky. Did I mention he is allergic to animals? Let's welcome William today, and let's share our wisdom together. William, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and I really appreciate being here. And I'm going to dive in to the content. It's going to be a fire hose, and hopefully folks are prepared for that as they're coming into this. So a lot of information. We're not going to get bogged down on 2 or 3 things. We're going to hit a lot as we're going through this. And Eric, you know from Tucson how that went as well. And I did bring it down to the 1 hour. But I'll be open for questions if anyone has any. I'm not like locked into the hour. Some folks may be, but if you have any questions at all, please ask them throughout. And Eric or Marianne, if anybody does ask something in the chat, because I'm not monitoring it, that would be great. You know, just say, hey, Bill, can you stop? Or just yell out a question. So what we're going to go through today is a few things around the orientation process, why it's important for a board of directors, the 3 fiduciary duties, which are critical, protections for the board, governing docs, responsibilities of a board, avoiding risk, and then also board meetings and agendas. What's good about them? What's bad about them? What can you change about them as well? And on the right-hand side, this is an AI-generated picture. It can actually spell now. So that was a good thing. So as we launch into this, so you mentioned, you know, all of this great stuff here, so I don't need that. During the session and at Institute, and also when I'm working with leaders across the board, we want to provide you as many resources as possible. So in this session itself, we're going to provide 30+ resources that you can download. So what I'm going to do is provide the presentation. So all of these QR codes are active, so you should be able to download all of this information from a financial resources toolkit to policies toolkit, board assessment, event planning, volunteer development. All of those things are going to be available to you, so you'll be able to take that and start working with it right away. So we wanted to give you practical tools and guidance throughout this. So quick question, does anyone know how many nonprofits there are in the USA and how many chambers? Any thoughts, any guesses? All right, closest one to the number, I'll send you a book. So give me a guess. Number of nonprofits in the USA.
I'll start 650,000.
All right, we got 650. I need at least one more for the competition.
I'll say 1.2 million.
All right, so who is that? Julie?
Yep.
All right, wow. Okay, so let's just go to the nonprofit side with this as well. So in terms of nonprofits, 1.7 million. So you win.
Wow.
So I'll send you a book, and Marianne, if you could send me an address, and I'll send that over today. So you'll have a copy of the Essential Handbook for you. So yeah, 1.7 million nonprofits. I can't believe that there's that many, times X number of boards, times X number of board members. And then chambers, 7,200 chambers. Did folks even realize that there's so many chambers out there? Associations, these are trade professional associations, about 155,000, but every single one of them has a mission statement, and they should have a mission statement. Only about half the organizations that I work with that are even in this space have a strategic plan. So how many folks have a strategic plan? Raise your hand. All right, some don't, which is okay. And we have resources for that too as we move through the day. So in terms of just really quick terminology, and you probably see this with your boards as well. So throughout this presentation, you may see various terminology. So board of directors, you could have a board of trustees, a board of regents, like the U.S. Chambers Institute program does have a board of regents. You could have a board of advisors, but they're still boards. You can have a House of Delegates, a federated board. And then also the other thing is too, with an executive, like how many folks are CEO title here? Okay, so we have one couple people with the CEO title. And then most are executive director or president. Okay. So we have those roles. And then, so that's typically your chief staff executive director, CEO, or president are the three titles. And then you typically have a chief elected officer that's either a president or a chair. So one of the things I highly recommend is that you rethink this president title. And I threw this out in class because I think when you have someone sitting in the role as president, they feel like it's all on their shoulders. They have to do all the work. They're running and managing the organization. So it almost blends into kind of being a professional staff team member. I recommend the chair, and I only throw this out there, you can think about this, is because a chair, when you think of a chairperson for a board, you're thinking of someone that's sitting there, they're facilitating. It brings a different connotation. So as you're rethinking, if you're going through any governance restructures, chair is the way to go in terms of that chief elected officer. And it really takes away this professional staff team member mentality that I have to run the organization. So again, just really quickly on board terminology. And then how well do you think your boards know governance? I always ask that question. Are they highly informed around governance? How many of your boards have gone through a board development session or board training session? Raise your hand. All right, so it looks like one, and so this is a good quiz too. So if you're ever talking to your board and you're saying, oh, well, I think that we really need to have board development or board training session, I'll say, why? We know everything there is to know. We've served on the board for 10, 15 years. I've been treasurer for 30 years, which I've heard before. I know everything there is to know about nonprofit governance. You can have me teach the class. So what we did is, so Bob and I put together, so folks are familiar with Bob Harris as well, potentially. He teaches at Institute as well. So here's a good governance quiz, and I throw this out there, and I ask boards to look at this, and what's the understanding of board service? And I think George Washington said it well around governance. So winning is easy, governing is hard. To be a chief elected officer, board of director, and also to be an executive director that's managing this group is difficult if they don't have this information in front of them. So hopefully a lot of board members, you can share this video with them and they could watch it. You can chunk it up into different sections. But this is a question, just a 9-question quiz. You can download this. This is available for download. It's one of the resources. As well as one of the things that we're providing you today is nonprofit forms and templates. So Bob and I wrote this and put this together. And this has all of the forms and templates that you would need that we thought was important in terms of governance. So you could take a look. There's a board commitment form. Like, how many of us have a board commitment form in front of us or that board members sign before they come on the board? So board member code of conduct, confidentiality agreement, antitrust information. That's hugely important. A meeting sign-in sheet that has confidentiality listed on there, antitrust and some other items to say, we understand we're here in this meeting. It's going to be confidential. We're not going to breach antitrust. Social media agreements. So all of this is included in the toolkit that we're providing. So you can download it after this session as well. There is a QR code for that. So again, the quiz and the QR code, wanted to provide that. So in terms of the folks so does anyone have a volunteer commitment to serve that they give to their board and they sign off on? Okay, so Eric, you have one, you have that in place. Do you do it annually and have them sign off?
Yep, every January.
So every January they sign off. And why is that important, Eric, to make sure that you have that in place?
Well, I more so just to, make sure they know what they're getting themselves into, and a reminder for years.
Exactly. Right. And how many folks on this call would love to have one in place? Okay. So we do have some hands raised, and I think this is a great one. I think when you're justifying some of these things to your board, this is really risk management for the board and to make sure that you have a very functional board. So one of the things I wanted to provide you is this board commitment form or volunteer commitment to serve. It is available via download. It's real easy. You don't have to sign up to download any of this. It comes up in our Dropbox. So what the key things that should be in this are, I know my responsibilities. I'm going to be accountable, and I'm going to be part of an orientation or training. I'm going to attend the board meetings. I'm going to cooperate. I'm going to understand. I'm going to be a good team member with the professional staff team. So it is a partnership that we have together. I'll be a good fiduciary. We'll talk about fiduciary duties later. And then one of the things that you want to have in every volunteer commitment form is this one section that's over here on the right-hand side. And it is the dismissal. So everything that you put in place should have teeth. So if they fail to fulfill the commitments, they really should, they should either resign their position or the board should take some action. If they're not showing up, if they're not doing the work that they need to as a fiduciary. So wanted to provide this, and these are some of the things that we have included, but you can feel free to modify this to make sure that it really works for your organization as well. So I'm going to ask a quick question here. So what gives the board the authority to govern? Like, what gives your organization the authority to govern and the authority to exist as an organization? Does anyone know?
In the incorporation documents.
Okay. So incorporation, that's exactly one thing that gives you that. And then, so Julie, since you answered that, how can you lose your authority to exist as an organization? What can an organization do to lose that incorporation status and tax status?
By not abiding by the IRS rules.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah, I'm putting folks on the spot. I know it's not that early, so everybody's had their coffee, right? So feel free to answer as well. But when you look at the authority to govern, and so you hit the nail on the head. So your authority to exist, you are an incorporated organization. So this is just an example of an organization that I've worked with, National Utility Contractors Association. This one are state organizations. And it shows here when they were incorporated, the life period of their incorporation, their status date. Here's the one thing. I don't know if you could see my pointer, but entity status active. So I've been working, when I work with state organizations, I'm working for a national, I'm pulling these up. Sometimes I have to really pay attention to this entity status to make sure that it is active. In some cases, it says it's inactive or it's been taken away for some reason. So it's always good to take a look at your Secretary of State, South Dakota Secretary of State, and just look at your incorporation and make sure that you are fully incorporated, because that could be an issue into the future. And then, so what your authority to exist, and Julie, you noted it. So you have state corporate law, which is what you mentioned. So you're incorporated. So you have a relationship with the state. That's where it starts first when you're incorporated, like this organization, 1975, originally incorporated. The other part is your federal. So you are a 501. I would say most of you are 501c6. You have other entities that are other C entities, potentially a C3 entity as well. So you have that federal relationship as well, where you're getting the tax exempt status from the feds itself. So your Treasury, the IRS. And then also, one of the things, Julie, that you mentioned was, if you fail to renew, like if you fail to file your annual report, for example, at the Secretary of State for several years in a row, you can risk losing your incorporation. And remember, the IRS recognizes you as a tax exempt organization that's in good standing. So I've seen organizations that have lost their corporate status, lost their federal status as well, because they failed to renew, and then they had to go through the process to be able to do that. So I always do a quick check on the Secretary of State to make sure everything's good. I always check on the IRS site as well. So failure to renew is one of them. You also have to prove that you had your annual meeting, so you file that with the state every year. I don't know if your accountant may do that or you may do that, but I always ask folks to double check. And I think in one of the classes that I had at Institute, I had folks check, and somebody came up to me and said, "Thank goodness you told me, because we were not active, and we could have lost, our incorporation." So the other thing is that's important is to make sure that you are filing your IRS Form 990 informational return as well, every single year that you're in business. So that's important. And so that's your annual business filing needs to happen as well. So one of the things that I mentioned to board members is, as a board member, like, I think that they take it for granted sometimes in terms of the work that they're doing and the position that they have. So one of the things I mentioned is, you are a trustee of a state organization. So you're incorporated. The board is viewed as a trustee. So the state puts trust in the board to make sure that it's doing the right things for the organizations at the right times as well. So when I pop up this screen during a board development session, it's like, oh, wow, I can't, we're really trustees. We have a big responsibility. So I pull this up, and this is another organization that I've worked with before, but it really gives you that picture. It's like, wow, here's the president, here's the directors, they're listed here. I mean, it really says a lot in that way. But while you're a trustee, the state has oversight of your organization to make sure you're doing the filings, all the things we talked about earlier. And I'm sure, have all of us seen your Form 990? I'm sure you've all done that. You've looked at it, you filed it, you probably signed off on it in one way or another, as well. And I know the Form 990 is not always a fun thing. It's more of like a tax document. I know it's an informational return, but it tells you a lot of different things. And the one question I want to ask this group again is, and this is for another book, I'll throw it out there too. So what are public records within your organization? There's several things that are public records where if somebody requests them, you have to produce them. So does anyone have an idea of one of the public records?
Our bylaws.
So Taryn said bylaws. Thank you, Taryn. Anyone else?
Your 990 is public, I believe.
So David says 990. Perfect. Anyone else before we move on? All right, so public records, and this is something that you wouldn't even think about, and I didn't even think about this when I took on the role. I was an executive director as well of several organizations and CEO. And when you look at public records, so here's a 990 informational return. But when you look at public records directly, here they are. So Your Form 990. So David, you get a book. Awesome. Taryn, thank you so much. But let's throw one in for Taryn as well for answering the question. So hopefully, Mary Ann, you're keeping track of all the books that are going out today. And your letter of determination. So this is something that you should have handy. So one of the things that a nonprofit does is whether you're going to be a 501c6 or C3, you're going to file an application form with the IRS, a form 1024 or 1023. 1023 is typically C3 foundations. 1024s are everything else. You're a C6, so you'd probably file a 1024. So what the IRS does, and then it gives you a letter of determination and says, okay, thank you, you've applied. Now you are granted 501c6 status, and here's all the things that you should know about it. And then, of course, your Form 990, which you file as well. So if I am someone that's asking you, so if I go up to Tim and I say, Tim, I go into your chamber and I say, I need a copy of your Form 990 and your letter of determination and your application form, are you going to say yes or no?
Is it rhetorical or you're asking?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you. So if I walked in and said, hey, Tim, I'm just off the street, not a part of the chamber, not a member. I'd like to have your Form 990 for the past 3 years, letter of determination, application form.
Give me a couple days.
Give me. All right. So, and I know typically that couple days means, hey, I'm going to talk to an attorney. Here's someone coming off the street and all this other stuff. But you do have an obligation to produce it for me at that moment because I'm in your office. So you can also charge me for copies. So you can have reasonable charges for copies and all of those things, but it should be produced to me. So the IRS has 3 different ways. So if you do it via email, there's a number of days that you have to respond to. If it's via phone, you can respond in a certain number of days. If it's in person, what are those number of days? Fines, so failure to produce could be daily fines. So it could add up to thousands of dollars. So one of the things that I recommend is to have these on your website and just say, go to my website. David?
Well, I was just going to tell, I ran the Montana Chamber for 3 years, and we were in a lot of political fights with really well-organized environmental groups and some others. And part of the standard harassment that went back and forth between contending parties was asking for 990s.
Yes.
We don't do that in South Dakota so much. In fact, I'm surprised I remembered because it's been 24 years. But that's one environment. So if you get caught with a growth issue, some people that don't like just oppose your political views, you may get asked.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. I mean, folks will try to trap you so that, then they file and say that you refuse to provide access to that information, which is public record. And that's where they try to get you. I'm with you, David, on that too, because I've seen that happen quite a few times. And in terms of your 990, the reason I would look at your 990, so there's several reasons. First is how much revenue, like this organization has about $3 million in revenue. And you can see here 2.5 million. It has salaries of almost 900,000, and then it has a reserve or net asset fund balance of about $812,000. So that's just normal information. How many board members, how many staff members, all of those things. The other part of it is there's a couple other sections that are important. And it asks you these questions. Is this a group return for subordinates? So if you have other organizations, other Cs that are part of this, subsidiaries, those things, are you filing it together or separately? Your tax status, when it was formed, number of voting members, all of those things. And then there is a list of all of your directors that are in that Form 990. So that's all public record. You can't hide. I know some organizations say, well, nobody needs to know who our board members are. Well, it's on your Form 990. One of the other things is 7B here is net unrelated business income tax. It's called UBIT. And for folks that aren't aware of UBIT, unrelated business income tax, typically what I've seen, so it's unrelated to the mission of the organization. and typically it happens in magazines and advertising. So let's just say you have a magazine that you produce, you have $100,000 in advertising, it's $50,000 to produce it, and expenses, 50,000 of that is unrelated business income tax. And I know Taryn's looking at me and saying, Bill, what do you mean? That's part of our mission because it's communicating our message and all of those things. But the IRS does not view that as part of your mission because it's not really getting that immediate benefit to members. Like, for example, someone may argue that sponsorship is not should be UBIT as well because it's really unrelated. You're getting it, but it does support your event or your conference where your members attend, and those folks are getting value in that. But again, it's out there because there's nonprofits that'll start a Cold Stone Creamery and run that, and then all of a sudden all the profits from that are tax exempt and they're hurting for-profit businesses out there. So they really don't want that crossover into the for-profit world where you have your advantage as a nonprofit. So again, just wanted to mention UBIT there. And then the next thing is when you look at some of these, they ask for number of voting members. Do you document the meeting? Do you hold minutes? Does each committee have authority to act on behalf of the governing body? When I say on behalf of the governing body, what I highly recommend is that your committees are acting on behalf of the strategic plan that the governing body has set. Your committees and task forces should not have their own strategic plans or their own mission statements or any of that. They should be fully involved in executing your mission. That is the committee's role. Committees, it's like the tail wagging the dog type thing. The board sets the vision, sets the strategic plan. The committees then follow up and act on that and make sure it's moving forward. And I know committees have various functions, but typically it's to advance the mission of the organization. Here's one thing that I would look at, and David mentioned this too. There is a website and database for this. So did the organization become aware during the year of a significant diversion of the organization's assets? Does anyone know what a diversion of assets is? Or venture to guess? All right, so this one is like a PC way of saying, did anyone steal from your organization? And diversion of assets is listed here in number 5, and it shows how much. When you had Bernie Madoff, there was a lot of yes here and how much, and it was noted within the 990 as well. So your 990 becomes a permanent record of your organization. So if you have a sponsor that pulls your 990 and then looks at this and says, $50,000. Okay, let me read more into this. Treasurer took off with $50,000 and cannot be found anywhere. The authorities have been notified, and all the records have been destroyed. So you think of a sponsor, they're like, why should I give money to this organization? So this is on here. The explanation is on there as well. The Washington Post, I believe, put together a database of all significant diversions of assets. If you do Washington Post, if it's still up, I don't even know if it is, diversion of assets, they listed it. So you could put an association's name in and it talks through that. So those are just some of the key things in here. And then in terms of this section here, this is the section, I believe this is part 6, where it asks, do you have policies in place? Do you have certain policies in place? And how many of us have key policies in place, like conflict of interest, whistleblower? Raise your hand. Do you have that in place? Okay. And if you don't worry about it, because we're going to provide them to you as well. We have the top 40 policies. We have a policy toolkit that you're going to be able to download. But the IRS strongly recommends that you have a certain set of policies, and the ones listed here: conflict of interest policy, whistleblower policy, document retention and destruction policy, compensation policy for those that are highly compensated, to do an annual compensation analysis. So we do a lot of those for nonprofits. And what it does is we look at the CEO of the compensation of the CEO to make sure that's in line with other like professionals. So we do that. So there isn't an organization that's $1 million in revenue and they're paying their executive director $700,000. And then you find out that the executive director was the founder, and all the money that's coming to the nonprofit is going to the executive director. So just a quick note on those 990s. And then in terms of a governance chart, so does everyone have a governance org chart in place? So we do have one in there. And what's at the top? I'm going to ask the question, what's at the top of your org chart? Anyone? I think Colette's trying to speak. No? All right. So at the top, so if you think of an org chart for an organization, it's typically the board of directors, then you have your executive, like on the side, executive director, you have your staff members, your CPA and attorney. So that's kind of off to the side. Then you have all of your committees, task forces, they kind of fall underneath. There's one thing that I would ask you to add on to your org charts that I think is going to be powerful when you present this. So one of the things that I'd like to add on to every org chart is the membership. They are right at the top. They should be at the top, and they should stay at the top, because that's why we're here. So we never lose sight of this at all. And that's why we have our strategic plan. That's why we have our mission. That's why we want to make sure that we're providing a huge return on investment and return on mission to our members. So that's the only thing I wanted to talk about here. And if you think about your board, at what level should they really function as a board? This is the altimeter of governance. We believe that a board should be at the 50,000 foot level. It should not be engaged in staff work, number one, and it shouldn't be engaged in committee work as well. And I really dissuade boards from having committee chairs also as board members. And the only reason I say that is what happens. You end up bringing committee work to the board table. It's best to grow those leaders, have a committee chair, vice chair, have them report to the board, provide their needs. They understand what the strategic plan asks of them. And then the board is really serving at that 50,000 foot level. And then as the folks here, I have here 10,000 foot level for management, but I know, for the executive directors, CEOs here, you're getting motion sickness because you're going from 10,000 to 50 to 25 to 10,000 to 50, maybe even 100,000 at times when your board isn't even thinking as high as it should be. So I realize the special nature of this group, but 50,000 foot level. And then, so I'll get more into this because I know the question is, well, I've had board members say, well, what is my role then? Is it not what Eric does or this executive? I've had one board president right before strategic planning say, am I supposed to be doing what the executive director is supposed to be doing? We stopped strategic planning. We went into board development first for 2 hours, and that really helped. And the other thing is getting bogged down into the weeds has always been an issue. So we do have something you can download and laminate and actually bring that to, to board meetings. So this is a weed sign. You can laminate it. Folks can hold it up. We're in the weeds. We move on. I have another tool that I think is more friendly and soft that I think you'll be able to use. But this is something you can download. I mean, it's pretty bad artwork, but we leave it here for you. So in terms of a high performing board, and if we didn't have the short time that we have together, I'd ask more questions, but we looked across the board and we looked at what makes a board high performing. Strategic. So that means you have a strategic plan, a board that's innovative, that's not afraid to take chances, is bold in strategic planning, and is bold in their work at the board table as well. And this is, so if you think of your boards, and if you have a treasurer, or any board member that says, especially a treasurer, which I've sat in on so many, we had a great strategic planning session. He's like, well, I hold the purse string, so I don't know if we could do any of this. I'm like, no, not one board member has any more power than the rest of the board. The whole board needs to be on board with this. No pun intended there. Engaged, they have to show up. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. And then as we were talking about innovative and bold. And when you think of the characteristics of a strong board, they go through board development. They have a great strategic plan. They have their ears to the ground. So when they're coming to the board meeting, they're talking to you and saying, this is what our members are saying. This is what our constituents are saying. This is what the city council said, whatever it is. And then also agreeing on how to operate and function as a board. sometimes there's so much dysfunction because there is no agreement on the rules of the road. So I have some of those to discuss as well. And I think a lot of times you can't agree on how to operate because you don't know what your role is. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit later as well. And I think working as a team, that's pretty much self-explanatory. And then the last thing is, I think there needs to be kindness on our boards. I think people need to get along. I think people need to do a great job. And then I don't know, this is for folks that were Institute. Eric, anybody else that was at Institute? This is the kindness bench that's on the campus at Tucson, and it talks to the power of kindness. So if you're ever there, sit on that bench, take a picture, send it to me, and bring it to your board as well. So kindness is huge. So as we mentioned before, governance is important, but also management is important as well. So some of you may have seen this in places. So this is a postcard that typically I'll bring to board meetings. Board governs, staff manages. That's the mantra that should be in place. There should be a pretty clear line in terms of the board governing as a fiduciary and staff executing as the management team. But it's all one team. And then the one other thing, is if there are board members that are going to be listening into this as well, is that when you write board of directors in your minutes, I never capitalize it because if you do, I capitalize professional staff team, the PST. So it's the BOD and the PST. So there's 100% equal respect between both. So I throw this out there. And then I want to ask you if you think that your role as an executive director or CEO is this. So I'm going to throw this up here. So being an executive director is easy. It's like riding a bike, except the bike is on fire, you're on fire, everything's on fire. Right? So I think this is a shirt you could probably wear to your board meeting, if your board's kind of open to that. Amazon actually sells this shirt. So it's kind of a neat thing to have, and it's fun. And it speaks to the really difficult position that you have. There is no other position like this anywhere else in the corporate world. You are going above and beyond the corporate. I don't think in a corporate world anyone has 12 to 24 bosses that turn over every couple of years. And I know they may have some kind of board or some kind of advisors, but typically as a CEO, they just say, okay, this is what goes, that's a highway or my way type of thing, versus the work that we do where we have a board of directors that provides that guidance. So a little bit more on the governance versus management model. This one was in a set of bylaws. I have it here. You can scan this if you want a copy of this, but in their bylaws, they say that the organization adopted a model of management and governance to ensure volunteer leadership. While the board shall govern, the CEO shall manage, they will work together. So this is not only for current, but for future. So I would highly recommend adding that to your bylaws if you can, if you do have a bylaws revision coming up. Okay, so now the question is, that I'm always asked, what is governance? What does that mean to me as a board? So when I get asked that question, governance is to steer as an organization. It's developing policy, setting a course for the chamber. Effective governance is efficient, allows a respectful conflict of ideas, preserves organizational assets, refrains from day-to-day management of the chamber, and leads to positive outcomes. And in management, staff's responsible for administration and business operations. So that's really important. So I always pull this up, and then they say, well, what do I actually really do as a board member? So I said there's 3 things as a board member that you're responsible for. And I call it clear-cut governance. You can download this. You can put this in your presentations, strategy, strategic plan, internal, external policies and positions that they put together, which takes a lot of time managing a strategic plan at the high level, their policies, and then oversight, but not management. And I put in the bottom corner here is that the executive director is responsible for management of the organization. So it's something that you could share to say, hey, why don't we talk about this at one of our board meetings and see, and just discuss this to make sure we're all on the same page. So that's clear-cut governance, gavel to gavel. So the one quick question I'll ask here is does any one board member have any more power than the rest of the board? Let me think. Anyone have an answer to that?
In theory, yes, but in practice, no, there's always louder voices on the board.
Right. So Julie, so one of the things is that you're exactly right. So none of the board members have any more power than another. It's not granted or vested into them by the Secretary of State, the incorporation process, all of those things. And I had a board member say, well, I'm the president, so I get to do this. I'm spokesperson, all this stuff. And I said, well, guess what? Who gave you that authority and power? Well, it's in the policy documents that the board approved. So I was like, okay, so the board approved. So the board is providing that and saying you can have that extra responsibility, but you have no more authority or power. Your vote is one vote on the board itself. So what I'd like to just highlight here, and you might want to use this with your boards, is gavel to gavel decision-making authority. So when a gavel drops, decisions are made. Gavel drops again, board business is done. There's nothing that comes back that wasn't during that board meeting that changes the direction of what happened. All your resolutions, everything that came through. So if you know, Brittany gets a request from the board president said, I really don't like the decision that we made. So we need to backtrack a little bit on that. And I approve this. And Brittany, you're going to say, I'm sorry, you know, the board approved this. When the gavel dropped, we actually made that decision. So if you'd like this to change, we have to move this into the board, into a future board meeting. So it should be an agenda item. But I've had, so this is a great way to just say, hey, I'm sorry, you know, as a board, we govern as a body. We do not govern independently. So saying this, I always say this helps with ensuring that there are protections for you as a board member. So if you're doing the right things, the things we're talking about, individual versus governing body responsibilities, there are protections for you here. So these are the 4 protections for a board member. Directors and officers liability insurance. Do we all have directors and officers liability insurance in place? So if you don't, some organizations don't. If you don't, I would highly recommend it. It's so well worth the dollars to be able to put that in place, because you do not want your members to be, your board members to be at risk, as well as yourself, you know, as you're managing the organization. Incorporation is a huge plus. Remember, I talked about incorporation and losing incorporation. The big thing is, you always hear about piercing the corporate veil. So they have to, so if there's a lawsuit, you have your directors and officers liability insurance, which will cover legal expenses, all of those things. They will help to settle over a certain point. Incorporation means it's hard to pierce that corporate veil and go after you personally as a board member. Volunteer immunity, there is a federal act, and all of the states have a volunteer immunity act. So you can mention to your board that they are protected in the state as well as federal for the work that they do in the normal course of board business. And then also, how many folks have indemnification in their bylaws as well? Okay, so if you don't, I would highly recommend thinking about it, but I would do directors and officers liability insurance and indemnification. I would have both at the same time, because what can happen is, and this happened to an animal shelter that I was working with, one board member ended up going to an attorney for things that he felt were not appropriate within the shelter itself. He ended up racking up, I don't know, $50,000, $75,000 in legal fees. Well, guess what? He is a board member. He was doing this as a board member, and those expenses are now the responsibility of that animal shelter. And without D&O insurance, there's no payment there. So you've opened up, even though this can happen anyway, with indemnification, I always recommend D&O insurance. I would have both. I would never have one or the other. But D&O is not hugely expensive, but I would definitely have that in place. So I just wanted to share that. And then, so once I go through this and I say, okay, here's the ways to protect you, you also have to, as a board member, understand the organization. So your board needs to really understand the organization. So they have to read to lead, as I say. Understand the mission. So this is an IRS submission. So if you have a strategic plan and you've actually updated your mission statement, you'll actually write that new mission statement and say that there was a change in your Form 990 informational return that you'll be filing. We talked about articles, relationship to state. Bylaws are hugely important because they're a relationship between our members and the board itself. Policies, I call them wisdom of the board and prior boards. So it's policies set a standard for which we do things now and in the future, whether it's refund policies, whether it's exhibit booth policies, whether it's whatever policy. Strategic plan, highly recommend having one. We'll talk a little bit later about that, and your annual budget. So these are the governing documents of the organization. I do have a sample, and you can pull this up and read this later, an indemnification that a chamber has written. This is in Missouri itself, and it really talks about what indemnification covers. Against all expenses, liabilities, so attorney fees, court costs, litigation expenses, judgment, fines, penalties, settlement payments reasonably incurred or imposed upon such a person in connection with any threatened, pending, or completed action. So the one thing that I want to mention, if you are ever, whether it's ever at the doorstep of a potential lawsuit, notify your insurance company right away. Because if you don't, you have your attorneys working on it, they will deny you coverage. I've seen that happen several times already. And it was huge. So we'll move on to the next one. I want to continue moving. So in terms of fiduciary responsibilities, these are the three that are most important. So these are duty of obedience, duty of care, duty of loyalty. So you could see what they are here. Duty of obedience, we're going to follow governing documents. We're going to have that gavel authority. We're going to make decisions as a governing body. Duty of care, good business judgment at all times, all the times. Duty of loyalty, avoiding conflict of interest. I'm not going to bring my company's interest into the board for any reason, purpose at all. This isn't about me. It's when I'm at your chamber, Eric, I'm going to put your chamber hat on, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm always asked the question, well, it's great, Bill, that you brought this to us, but it means nothing. You know, who really cares about this? Probably something you made up, or the American Society of Association Executives, or the chamber. And then I pop this up, legal. These are legal fiduciary responsibilities. And they say, well, what do you mean legal? I mean, you could probably make the case for it. Well, I say, well, it is legal because it's in every state statute. So if you look up nonprofit state statutes in the state of South Dakota, you will find a version of obedience, care, and loyalty in there. So that, as a trustee, they have to abide by. So it's a legal fiduciary responsibility. So just an example of a breach of that. I don't know if folks have heard of Silicon Valley Bank and the issues there with Silicon Valley Bank. So I just want to read this one sentence here. They failed because of a textbook case of mismanagement by the bank. Senior leadership failed to manage basic interest rate and liquidity. Its board of directors failed. And Federal Reserve supervisors failed. Everyone failed. There was no communication. All of this fell apart. This was a big report if you want to read it. But it really speaks to motions supporting your fiduciary responsibilities. And I just say, if you are approving a budget, have proof that you approved that budget at that meeting. Financial statement, here's what I say. Do not move to approve a financial statement. So take that out of when you say I move to approve a financial statement. I move to accept the financial report as presented. We are not accountants. We are not taking responsibility for that. We cannot say that everything's accurate in there. In the budget, we can, because we've reviewed it, we put it together. So that's the only thing I throw in here. So policies, if you have amendments, positions, I would make sure that that's in there. Another key thing is that I believe happened here at SVB was this: missing in action. So we had missing in action board members in place, missing in action Federal Reserve supervisors, missing in action leadership. So what happens is, I throw this out there, and you could do this as a statement too. I pull up an empty chair at your board meeting and I say, what is this? They say, well, what do you mean, Bill? It's an empty chair. I'll say, this is a board member that is either not here or not here physically or mentally during the meeting. They're on their phones. They're not contributing. This is a chair that somebody else could take and move forward with and make good decisions. So if you don't believe that you can sit in this chair effectively, then I consider that a missing in action board member. So my book has a chapter on that as well. So that's MIA. And then So if you want to dig down a little bit deeper, I want to provide you with a tool, because it's always like, I always get the question, what's the responsibility of the board versus the director versus the president? Do you ever get that question? Like, what's the difference between all of them? So I put together a document here that you could take. So these are all of the responsibilities from the board responsibility, directors, and the president's role. So I have several pages here, like organizational planning, resource management, determining monitoring programs, promoting the organization, and there's more in here as well. You can download this and actually provide it and say, hey, we have a tool here. Let's revise it a little bit. But I wanted to share this with you as well.
Bill,
So
I have a question on that. So
sure.
the middle section is board of directors roles, not executive director, correct?
It's the director's role individually, right? And you can add a column where you can have your executive director, and that's usually personal as to how you execute, but the executive director typically executes. So yeah, these are all the volunteer leaders, not the professional staff leaders. Great question. So in terms of board orientation, we talked about it. We think just a few things. It should be annual. The entire board, if you can record it, make sure that if you have new board members coming on, they can watch it, or you can spend time with them. They need to be able to read to lead, so they need the documents. They sign that commitment form. It's also I would record when you have a board development session, record in your minutes, because that goes back to the legal, like as an executive director, CEO, you have to say, yes, I provided this, and it's in the minutes, because nobody could say, well, I didn't know my role because Eric didn't tell us the role. So then they want to pass the blame to you. So I would record it in your minutes. It's a permanent record. Minutes cannot be destroyed. They're a permanent record of the organization. If you look at a document retention policy, those are things that don't get destroyed or deleted. And then just something for your board meetings, if you wanted to have this at the start of every board meeting. The American Institute of Architects has this. And you could start this at the beginning of your board meetings if you'd like, and just say, hey, when we're in our meeting together, we're going to give space and grace. We're going to respectfully challenge. We're going to lean into discomfort. And you can even ask, like, Taryn, you could say, well, which one of these stand out for you? And somebody will say, oh, I love to lean into discomfort, because your board meeting should be an uncomfortable, comfortable every single time. It should not be a comfortable meeting. You're going to be talking about tough things. So it's okay to lean into that discomfort, as long as you're respectfully challenging it and it's not personal. All right, so board advancing the mission. So I'll go through strategic planning, why you need a plan. I'm not a bullet reader, so I think a strategic plan is your blueprint for your organization. It's going to lead your organization to success. It's going to bring your professional staff team and board of directors together. Everyone's going to be on the same page to make sure that they're doing the right thing at the right time and fulfilling their fiduciary responsibilities. So typically an organization has a blueprint, and I call it a brand platform. So your mission statement is your purpose. That's what we do right now. So it shouldn't be confused with the vision statement is our intended outcome, what we want this to look and feel like into the future, if we do everything right, if we achieve our goals and strategies. And our values are important too, because they guide us. If we're going to have a strategic relationship with another organization, we want to have a good set of core values that we put in place to make sure that happens. And then here's just some examples of some core values that somebody did in Legos at a conference. It was kind of neat that they did that. I think it was a bar association. Here's another one. This is the South Metro Denver Realtors. They had their mission, vision, and values in the middle. So the Venn diagram with the organization right in the middle. So kind of cool there that they've done. Strategic plan, remember, is part of your governing documents. And when you think of the planning process for a strategic plan, it's the board's responsibility. No matter how much you would want it as a professional staff team member, if the board's not bought in, it's not going to be successful. So they need to see the value in this. It's good to have a facilitator. And I know that's tough sometimes with budgets, but I don't know if you want to be the facilitator or your board president, because what happens is in a year, well, Tim ended up facilitating this, and it was all what he wanted to do, and that's why the plan's failing. Put it on the facilitator. 3 to 5 goals typically in a strategic plan, shouldn't be more, shouldn't be less. That's a sweet spot. You should have key strategies for each goal. You should also have performance measures for each strategy within the goal itself. You talk about SMART goals. I go deeper, make every strategy SMART, make sure performance measures are there for every single strategy. And then a program of work is what comes out of it. It's your operational plan for the next 12 months. And then in terms of just planning trends, I can tell you this brief is better, not to have a 50-page report that nobody understands or figures out what it looks like. I'll show you some examples every 3 years. Don't do it annually. It doesn't make sense. Review your strategies and your performance measures annually. So those things within the goals that you want to change and tweak for the next year. Communicate that value. What I'd like to do is also, if you do have, let's say you have 4 goals, are there 4 board champions that will champion those goals and or sponsor those goals, and then 4 professional staff team members that could potentially champion the goals with the volunteer board members. So it helps to create that alignment. And we talked about program of work, and here's some examples I'd like to have some show and tell. This is great. This is a tent card, names on the other side. But if you don't do this at every board meeting, if you do name tents, put your strategic plan on the back side of the name tent. So guess what happens when you're at your strategic plan? Guess what they're staring at? Strategic plan. So I could pick up your name tent as a board member and say, are we really fulfilling our mission by doing this? Where does this really go into economic vitality? You know, when I'm in the Wyoming County Chamber. This is a 1-page plan from Wyoming County Chamber of Commerce. It's really neat. This is how it should be done rather than this big, long document that nobody's going to read. So again, a little bit more on name tents. It's the most expensive real estate on the table, and folks are looking at it the entire board meeting. If you do have office space, this is one that put their core values in and right behind their board space. And then also, if you are thinking about motions during your board meeting, going back to your strategic plan, these are some questions. And again, this is going to be within the documents that we provide. But these are the questions that I would ask. Number 1, does it advance our mission, period? And then everything else flows from there. Resources, is it legal? You can't imagine how many times I've asked, is it legal? And folks have said, I don't know if it's really legal. Can we do that? And they look at the attorney, no, that's not legal. So those are key things. Another thing to keep your board engaged and involved is also scorecards. I don't know how, does anybody do a board scorecard approach? And it doesn't have to be punitive. What I would recommend is taking something like this one here. Where is it? So advocacy, looking at all of this and having them look at it themselves and just checking off things, you know, am I involved in recruitment of members? That might be something I'd like to do more of. It's really more of a self-assessment rather than publishing it to the entire board. So I would use this as more of a self-assessment as a board scorecard. The next thing is, so in terms of the folks that have a strategic plan, do you have a 1-page strategic plan? Does anybody have one? Okay, so I do have an example, and you'll have a download of this. So this one is the Missouri Pharmacy Association 1-page plan, 5 goals on top, all of their key strategies right here. Love all of their goal sponsors. So these are board members that said we're going to sponsor. And then all of their committees were listed at the bottom. And what happened was they were like, what happened to the other committees? How come they're not listed here? And they were thinking, well, are they really functional committees? So this really gives you a good view of your committees, who's going to sponsor these goals, and all of the things on one page. And you can share this with your key stakeholders or members. And if you wanted to do a strategic planning process yourself, and maybe you have another local chamber come where it's somebody that's not involved with your chamber, but they can facilitate, I do have this strategic planning meeting toolkit that you can download after the session as well. And it has everything from how to do it to how to evaluate your plan and how to adapt your strategic plan itself. So I'm going to move quickly here. Board meetings, everyone loves them, right? Probably not. It's like, yeah, but they're a necessary evil within a nonprofit. You need to have your board have a forum to do the work that they do. But this is not a good board, right? I mean, when you see this, I mean, is this going to be a functional board meeting? Not at all. And this was another one. I worked with the Association of Lebanese Industrialists in Lebanon. This is their board table. Like, do you think everyone can see each other and talk to each other? I know it's a little bit rounded out, but if you're sitting at the back here and you're trying to talk to this person, you're in the mic. It's just very disconnected in terms of how that works. So I do have so I think that this will bog folks down, as we talked about. This is probably not conducive. I have another recommendation. And then when I look at the board meetings themselves, I do have another tool to keep your board meetings on track. You remember the weed sign? This is another tool. I don't know if folks know what this means. If anybody does, you get a book. All right, let's see. Anyone? Elmo.
I'm kind of cheating because you just told me about it in January, but
Go ahead, go for it. You get a book.
enough. Let's move on.
Right. So Elmo, so bring Elmo to your board meetings and your Zoom meetings. And I have an Elmo right here, actually. So during a meeting, Elmo could pop up and say, oh, in the it's Elmo. We got to Elmo this conversation. And it's a really respectful way to stop just things from going. So Elmo's been all over the place, all over the world, actually, and has been a really great resource. So I love Elmo. Please use Elmo. So enough, let's move on. And it's a great way to keep the meeting flowing and moving. So another thing, has anyone read this is a great tool, Parliamentary Procedures. Has anyone read the 816 pages, Julie? You have, Taryn has. Oh, wow. I give you a lot of credit for that. I don't think anybody else has, right? Laurie, no, I don't think so.
I had to do it in college. It wasn't for fun.
Oh, well, it could be for fun, right? You could sit down and read the 12th edition. But I do have a tool for you. So we have the guide to meeting rules of order. This is something to help get your members comfortable with Robert's Rules of Order. And it's not 812 pages. It's not even 100 pages. It's 2 pages. So it's 2 pages. It could be laminated. It could be at their table. They'll know how to do a motion, how to do a debate, how do you vote, all of those things. And just take them through this and they'll be much more confident in their role as a board member. So anyway, you can download this. QR code is here. If you have any problems with the QR codes, Marianne, let me know and I'll make sure that I get the documents that have an issue. So here's the one thing that I like to throw up there. I didn't say anything during the meeting, but I don't agree with the rest of the board on this issue. Obviously, there's a problem. People are walking out and don't know what the heck's going on at that meeting, and they don't understand how to work as a team. So just wanted to throw that out there. In terms of board meetings, I think this is important. Hollow U. I was at a strategic planning session last week in San Antonio with the neurologists. They had the setup like this. I immediately took this down. Immediately. I said, this is not a board meeting. And even if it was, I would still want to change the way the board meeting looks. So what I did was I changed it to this. Round tables. We had 3 round tables of 8 or 6 or whatever it was. And it feels like you're in more of a collaborative environment rather than the head table is the executive committee, down the side are all the directors, and then the junior directors are all the way at the end at the kiddie table, right? So I highly recommend thinking of your board meetings differently and thinking of your agendas differently, because if you have a working group type of session where you're doing it this way, you can do some great work and just have your agenda put together that has consent agenda items, which are items you're not going to talk about, you're going to approve at once, but you also have agenda items that are working group type topics. Like, we're not advancing the plan here. What are we going to do with that? So again, just really quickly on that, and I'll just breeze. I know I see Marianne on, she's probably pulling the hook on me. I know we're about 5 minutes over. But hopefully, I want to make sure you're getting a lot of value out of this. If you have another 5 minutes or so, I'll go through this. But for board meetings, if you are thinking about what goes into, if you have a secretary or someone that's taking minutes, this is all you need to have in your board minutes. And I would give this to your secretary and provide it. Should not be a whole summary or story or a book about that board meeting. And it's really just the decisions that were made, resolutions that were made, a little bit of a description there, next steps, action items, and then also any conflicts of interest that were declared. And then also the last thing that I want to mention is if there are any action items, these things right here, separate them out separately. Pull the action items out, get them to folks the next day so that they're not, so your meeting minutes aren't going out 3 weeks later, 1 week prior to the meeting with actions that should have been done prior to that. So have your actions come out of the board meeting separately. It should be a separate page that's also attached, as well as noting them within your minutes. So that's really what I wanted to mention there. I do have a tool for ground rules as well, if you want to have these in your meetings. And you can add to these. You can download these. Again, it's a tool that you can use. Confidentiality. If you arrive late, don't vote on the next agenda item. If you're halfway there, and I know Kendra's probably gone through this. It's like this person came in 30 minutes late. We're here at this next item, and now they're asking all of the questions that were already asked prior to that. It's very disrespectful. So majority decision, no regurgitating. Everybody likes to back it. Oh yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. No, just we're moving on. If we're 80% there with our discussions, let's move on. The other thing is what I hate in agendas too is new business at the end. I would remove that immediately from your agendas, and I would have this form that goes out prior to the board meeting. It's a new business agenda submission topic item. So folks will bring this and say, this is the new business that I want to introduce during the board meeting. It'll give time you as the CEO and as the president of the organization to review these things, and then make sure they're looking at it, not just, oh, I think this is great, but what's the rationale? How does it relate to our mission, our strategic plan? Is it measurable? What does success look like? What's the economic impact? They sign off on it and they present it intelligently rather than, oh, I think I have an idea. It shouldn't work that way. So new business, I'd like to take off the table other than here's new business that was submitted prior to the meeting, because it throws your whole agenda off. And speaking of agendas, here's a realtor agenda. This is what I highly recommend to have on your agendas. Right at the top, conflict of interest, antitrust is hugely important for an organization, and confidentiality. And then what I would like to do, if you have an invocation, pledge of allegiance, or whatever it is, you have your updates and all of those other things. I'm only throwing this up here for this right here. And I would put your mission on the agenda as well. So here's just another version of that working group agenda, strategic goals discussion. So your whole board meeting should be focused on these 4 things. And then during that working group session where you have folks break out, they can talk about issues that are not advancing these goals. So they come back and say, okay, here's the issue. And then what's your mega issue that you're going to address during the board meeting? And if there's any unfinished business, take care of that and be done. And new business is crossed out. So adjournment, what's next? Then we talk about what's next on the agenda, advancing the plan. And then you have these footnotes too: antitrust, conflict of interest, review of assignments, expectations. This is just one quick example, because I think what it does is helps you manage that risk. And I think there's been quite a few examples of risk issues. So I don't know if anybody has seen this. Has anyone seen this? San Diego Association of Realtors, SAC CEO, $1 million embezzlement. He was using credit cards for personal purchases. He was buying laptops and all those other things. He was selling them on eBay and getting cash. He inflated his vacation time and he sold items that made the association pay for on eBay. So that was the eBay stuff. So these were the 3 things that happened at the SDAR. And it was a total lack of, I would say, oversight by the board and others. And this is not the headline you want to be in. Disgrace Diamond, San Diego Realtor Kingpin. So this is a black eye, and this was a Diamond Association of Realtors. So this is the highest level that they've received. And also you could see the National Association of Realtors had class action suits, antitrust, all of those things. There was a $1.8 billion award, I think it was, and then there was a $480 million settlement. They have $1.8 million in the bank. They still have 1.6 or 1.2 million in the bank, or billion. They also have, I think, other pending lawsuits, but you can't quote me on that. But NAR is in a tough spot right now in terms of a lot that's happened, and it's changed the way that realtors are going to operate in July of this year. So anyway, so that's the risk piece, just being aware of it, antitrust violations, again, anything that's anti-competitive, copyright, apparent authority. In your organization, one of your board members and your executive director probably has the authority to sign checks, or they could speak on behalf of the organization. No other board member should have the authority to sign contracts. They should be told that this is your authority as a board member. If a director signs an agreement and they didn't have the authority, they're still legally bound, and so is the chamber, legally bound to that contract. Most likely you'll lose if you try to take this to court, or somebody, so whoever the vendor is, they could take you to court and you'll probably be liable. So it was apparent to the vendor that you had that authority, you signed it. It doesn't matter to the vendor if, that hotel that you booked 50,000 rooms and you shouldn't have, but you put the organization on the hook. Public records requests, we talked about. Photo notices. If you do have events, what I do recommend is looking at making sure you have photo releases for events. But really quickly, antitrust. And folks, is everyone aware of antitrust? So really quickly, antitrust laws promote fair competition and prevent organizations from price fixing, including with competitors, or monopolizing a market. So that's everyone on your board. Anyone that's in your meetings, they should not be talking about prices, or they should not be trying to take a competitor out of the market itself. So really quickly on that one, these are the fun parts. Jail time of 10 years. Individually, you could be fined up to $1 million. Corporations up to 100,000 plus that have been fined for this. But the plus side is, on the jail time, it's a federal prison, so it's a little bit nicer. So, it might be a good trade-off, 10-year vacation, right, David? So I think that this was just important for me to highlight. Have your antitrust policy at all your meetings, board meetings, just that folks see it. Do not do this, do this. And I would highly recommend it. You'll see samples of this. I won't spend a lot of time on this as well. If you do take photos, audio, and video, please at your meetings have a photography notice. By attending this event, you're aware that your image may appear in promotional materials, so they know that from the beginning. It's in signage in your event, and it's also noted in your registration materials. So anyone that's in that registers, they have to check off and say, acknowledge there's going to be video and audio used, and they might be within that, and they're releasing their image, likeness, and all of those things. Or they don't have to attend the meeting. Most people will not say, I'm not going to attend the meeting. So that is the one piece. Here's the meeting sign-in sheet that I would highly recommend to avoid antitrust issues, conflict of interest, and confidentiality. You can download this. Folks can sign it. You can have a DocuSign if you want to move things forward as well. And in terms of the board and their strategic role, really quickly, their strategic plan, again, we talked about, it's a good transitional thing for boards, and empower staff team, make sure your resources are in place, communicates value. We talked about the process already. And these are just some great examples if you're looking for them. This is a pop-up tent that's in a board meeting. So during your board meetings, your strategic plan can be on this pop-up, and not only on the back of the name tent, you bring it with you. You bring it to your events so folks know what it looks like. So you see a couple of examples. One is a smaller card that Tallahassee Board of Realtors has. This was another realtor organization. This is the Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce. Look at this great one-page strategic plan. Our voice, our community, and I think in our facility. And it really speaks to the strategies here, and it talks about the chamber strength, why it's respected, and the core values that it has as an organization. So one page done. And then here's also a brochure. This is the Michigan Chamber. Awesome. Again, real easy to read. You can have this all in just a couple of pages on a trifold. Here's another one, New York State Realtors, one pager. Really great to have. Another one, one pager. This is the Beef Industry Association. We helped roll out their strategic plan. Huge organization, still was able to do it in like 2-3 pages. So that's a quick. Here's the Bartlesville Chamber of Commerce in their office. 4 goals right there at the top. Love it when folks come in, when your members come in to see this. All of their materials are branded with their strategic plan. So this is on their wall. It's the cog. So they are the cog to make all of these things happen. And then it's all on their pens, their business cards, all of those things. They've really embedded their mission. If you really want to do it like this is really going all the way, for your strategic plans. So here's a template you can download. So if you want to sit down with your board and just say, hey, let's talk about our strategic plan. You could do this and say, what do you think our mission is? What do you think our vision is? And then have the board talk through these just normally. And then so Taryn can come back and say, okay, after our meeting, I put this together. And I think this is what we talked about. Okay, we have a strategic plan, at least for the first time. And we're almost to the end here. And before I go, I just wanted to, and I'll answer any questions. I know we're about 15 minutes over, but wanted to give you a lot. So it's okay, Marion? Okay. So tools before I go. So we have the nonprofit life channel. So we have a lot of things. We have the fiduciary roles of a board. We have a story that I put in here. We have my book. It's also listed in here. We do have the governance and operations toolkit that you'll be able to download, and it includes a lot of great things in there as well, like a board vitality index. So you grade yourself from an A to an F in terms of our board agendas, our board preparedness, our meeting minutes, all of those things. Within this toolkit as well, you have an annual self-examination. You don't have to share this with anyone, but what's my commitment? Do I understand my role? Let them think about this as a board and to know where they need to do better. So we have the board impact toolkit as well. So what is governance, purpose of board, fiduciary duties, a lot of things we talked about plus more. You can download that right here. And it has a lot of key things in there. So you could see governance, policy, and position development, the 3 fiduciary duties. It has exercises within it, who's responsible for what, the board, the executive director. So here, Eric, you can even check off who's responsible for these things and agree on that. The policies that should be in place that we talked about earlier, they're listed in here as well. And then also, I'm including an 80-page board orientation PowerPoint template for this group as well, because I really like Marianne a lot and Eric and the rest of the group here. So you have a lot of stuff to take away. So also, you could forgive me for going over a little bit, but the board orientation toolkit, 80 pages, it has notes. So Kendra, you can take this and you can read the notes and you can deliver this board orientation. You can pick the things that you want, don't want, add in things about your organization, and it's there. So Bob Harris and I put this one together. We also have the strategic planning toolkit that we talked about earlier, which has these things, an action plan. So you can pull that down and actually start action planning your strategic plan. It has a dashboard that you can use that you can have at every board meeting to show things are in progress, completed, or in danger of not being completed. So highly recommend using the dashboard as well. And then also one-page plan. This is not pretty. This is me. I mean, you can make a pretty one-page plan like all those other ones, but this is for folks that don't have a budget and they just want to put this in place and have a one-pager. We have a sample strategic planning survey in there that you could use, 10 questions that you can ask prior to strategic planning. We also included a board assessment toolkit. So this is everything that you need to assess your board. And if you would like to have these key questions, so what's our performance as a group? How do we do in board training? What's our process and procedures? What's our strategy development? What's our relationship with our executive director? All of these things. We do have this in SurveyMonkey. So if you do have a paid SurveyMonkey account, we only need your login and not your password, just your login. We'll take credit cards, all that other stuff if you want, but in this case, we only need your login, and we can copy the survey right to your account, and you can use it right away. There's 5 to 10 questions in each category. It is wonderful if you do this. I highly recommend it. And I would do this before board development, so you know actually what to focus on. We have a strategic plan refresh checklist. So if you do have a strategic plan, you're thinking, how do I refresh it? We put this together for you as well. And then how you do it, what you should do in that to include refreshing a plan versus conducting a full strategic planning session. So we do delineate those things, and we make sure that what should your output be between both. So it really gives you those eyes on that. And there's a checklist in here that you could check off and say, we've done it, we haven't done it. We're also providing you with a committee orientation workbook as well. So if you have committees, this is great for them to download. You can go over this with them. And then the committees really understand their roles. But sometimes committees just don't work. So one of the things I'd like to provide you is a committee management toolkit, which is in here. It's your toolkit. Another toolkit that has all of your policies in there as well. Within the one committee management toolkit, there's also a form in there that's the sunset So how do you sunset a committee? There's a form in there, why you would sunset it, and sign off on it. The board reviews it. So this way you're not holding on the committees just are dying, just not there anymore. So this is your committee sunset form. Does it advance our mission? So you just go through this and it's really easy. It's not emotional anymore. It's more of like, okay, it doesn't meet our mission. It doesn't align to anything. Here's my rationale. The board agrees, or they're going to delay and study the process, or whatever it is. But I wanted to include this so you have a form that you're able to use to justify sunsetting a committee, because sometimes committees are out of control. We have a motion sheet, how to make a motion prior to a board meeting. So feel free to download this as well. And you could see in the motion prior to the meeting, folks can write it out. They could say, was it approved? Who was it approved by, and what strategic goal does it actually fit with? So again, it's making sure that we intelligently or really think through that this makes a difference or not, and this motion is going to really pay off for us. There's a committee answers. So committees have questions like, what do we do? How do we do it? Do we take minutes? Do we not take minutes? All of those answers are in this 32 pages for the committee answers workbook. And then finally, if you wanted to have a little bit of fun, you can watch my video on Muffin Mayhem. This was a live story of someone, an organization I worked with. It's in my book as well. And they were talking about the future of their exhibit, their conference, and they devolved into talking about muffins and how much muffins cost. And it just was great. You have to definitely watch that one. I think, I highly recommend it. Not just because I wrote it. It's real. It's out there. I'm sure you've dealt with that. And I think the last thing is failure is not an option. And folks say, well, failing is good. It is. You can keep failing and failing. At some point, you're going to succeed as an organization. Or if you keep failing, you're going to realize that it's just not working. This is not something that's going to fulfill our mission. It's not going to work. So failure takes you to a decision-making process to say, okay, we failed and failed and failed. It's not an option for us, but it's not an option for our society or our chamber as well. So if you do have any questions, we have a lot of tools and resources on our website. You have my phone number here. Call me anytime. You can email me as well here. And here's our website. So sorry, I went a little bit over, about 24 minutes, but hopefully you pulled a lot of information out of this and you have a lot of resources. So thank you so much, David. So any questions from folks? Any burning questions?
I have a comment and a question.
Sure.
Comment the responsibilities of a board member sheet that you had up there, and then the protections for a board member. I went through those in February with my board, and it might be the best thing that I've
Terrific.
ever done with my board. It just gave them a little bit of a direction, and it gave them a sense of safeness, I think, for being a board. My question is, going back to the UBIT on the 990,
Right.
how do you determine if it falls under UBIT, or is it just kind of what we think?
Yeah. So it's definitely, I think in terms of UBIT, I think that's where I would work with your accountant to make sure. I know that there's pretty clear-cut cases, which, again, advertising falls into that. There are other areas within UBIT that may come up if you're engaging in something, like I mentioned, just a far off example. If we started doing a joint venture with a for-profit company that was producing, I don't know, something within within the state that was being sold. I don't know if you have anything, this Chom Chom that takes cat hair off furniture, because we have 3 cats and we need to do that. Is that really within your mission to now support an entity that you can do it if you want to, but is it really going to support your mission in those ways? And you could say that profit does go back to your organization, and it's going to help support your programs, benefits, and services. But the big thing is with that unrelated business income taxes, then any nonprofit could then, like I said, infringe on a for-profit organization and have this tax benefit and potentially put a for-profit out of business, because now you have this favorable tax treatment. So UBIT, I throw right to the accountant to say, look at all the activities that we do. Advertising is a no-brainer in a lot of ways. Your sponsorships are fine, should not be an issue with UBIT. And I can't think of anything else other than doing something like investing in a business or a company that's producing a pen or some novel thing that you're doing that falls into that space. Even like your investments and stuff like that, they don't fall into UBIT because they're part of your corpus. They're profit. They're actually investments that you're gaining on, and that's still not unrelated business income tax because it's not a business generating or income generating activity. So I would look at all your income generating activities and then say which ones fall out of the scope of your mission, but there aren't going to be many, if not any, except for advertising and maybe a few other things. But again, an accountant would be huge.
The boldest proposal I've ever heard for a chamber. Can't think of the guy's name. He was a genius in our business, long gone. He said that where we have a competitive advantage as chambers is in real estate. And he actually was bold enough to say the chamber ought to open their own real estate office. We get all the inquiries. We wouldn't need more than 1 or 2 agents. We'd make enough in 2 sales to make up for all the dues all the rest of the real estate agents do. And we pay the UBIT. We're net better off. That wasn't my question. Minutes. Do you recommend recording the names that make motions and seconds, or is that not important?
It's not important. I would just recommend that you say motion was made, a second, and it was approved, and you had X number of abstentions. So and that's how I record it because, again, it's permanent record and there's no real requirement to do that.
We put names in case board members need alibi.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. And then I think for UBIT, if you think of it this way, let's say you have a museum that's a nonprofit and selling stuff at its museum that has nothing to do with its exhibits, it's not even related. Rental, if you're renting out real estate and you have some properties and you're renting them out as an Airbnb or you're renting those assets out, it's not, if it's not substantially related to the exempt purpose, like if your purpose is not to rent real estate or do what was just said, then that wouldn't be included as well. And then I think just some of the other things, if you have any royalties that you may, from trademarks, if you're trademarking something, copywriting something, even if maybe you're licensing something, or if you have a patent that the chamber has generated, that would be something that would fall outside of that. And I think that's really, I can't, if I thought of anything else, David, you kind of triggered my mind with the museum example that I've used in the past. I'm thinking those are the only other things, that could possibly fall into it. So any other burning questions from folks? Do you have enough tools and resources to take back? Yeah, I think there's like 30 plus. So please download them, or at least download them, look at them, and see what you think would be useful to share. And I wouldn't do a big dump on your board. I would just say, hey, we just had this session and I think that this would be great. Maybe we should do the board assessment together. Bill has the survey. He can copy it to us. Can we go through it and just see where we are, in some of these things and do an assessment? And then you can get into the board governance and operations toolkit, the PowerPoint template. If you don't have a strategic plan, now you're able to at least facilitate one. And I said you could do it at a Starbucks with a small board, or you can do it in a half day, at least just to get started. You don't need to hire a facilitator for your first strategic plan. At least have something out there. So anything else? Nancy, Heather, good? All good? All right, Taryn, anything else? I know I used you as an example quite a bit. I had you up on my screen. So Marianne, Eric, any final parting words?
Thank you. We appreciate the extra time. We assumed that as people needed to, they would drop off, but we thank you very much for giving us a full session's worth of information in a short time.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't want to rush through it. I wanted to give you all of that. And then Marianne, if you send me the list of folks and their addresses, and I'll make sure I'll send them the books.
Got them noted. Will do.
Yeah, I'm blessed to be with you. I love the work that you do. I know it's not easy. I've been in your seats. I know it gets frustrating. There's times when I even thought about quitting my job. And I was like, and it's always like, maybe I could wait out this board, or maybe I could wait out this president. If you put some of these things in place, you don't have to wait out anything. You can make sure that you're proactively putting systems in place to have a great board. And that's really what it should be. It shouldn't be a great executive that's like thinking this one person's out to get me and I have no recourse, to be able to do that. If you put this in place, you're going to have smooth sailing. It's going to take a little bit of time, but highly recommend it. And if you have any problems, you have my email. So I've spoken privately with folks at Institute. If you have a real problem going on and say, hey, Bill, could I have like a little bit of your time? Email me and I'll jump on the phone with you.
Thanks, William.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. And again, just please let me know if there's anything else. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.